With that as the backdrop to tackling an essay, let's turn our attention to the case of the angry employee. Here we see a purposeful killing, we think, with Danielle stabbing Victoria to death. So we have a clue that we may be considering murder 2 under a theory of intent to kill, and perhaps even premeditation for murder 1. So let's start the discussion with murder 2. The first sentence in a criminal law examination is the issue statement. I'm going to phrase it. Did Danielle commit murder 2 when she stabbed Victoria to death? I want to focus on the way this issue is written. I took the crime I'm going to discuss first, here it's murder 2, and I attached one fact to the issue statement to orient the reader. I didn't just write murder 2 or did Danielle commit murder 2? I added the fact, did Danielle commit murder 2 when she stabbed Victoria to death? This issue statement tells the reader I'm going to address the crime of murder 2, and in case there's more than one death in the problem, I'm talking about when Danielle stabbed Victoria. Having created an issue, my next obligation is to give the rule statement. That's the R part of IRAC. In criminal law, that means the definition of the crime that I noted in my issue. Since murder 2 is the crime I raised, the next line I'm going to write is the definition of murder 2. Murder 2 is a homicide committed with malice. And as we've learned, this definition has two separate elements built into it. Homicide is one element, and the mens rea of malice is the other. I want you to treat each of these elements in the rule separately. Take homicide first, define it if it has a definition, which it does, killing of one human being by the other, and apply facts to it. And then rinse and repeat. Take the next element, malice, define it, pick your theory, and apply the facts to it. And so on through all the elements of a crime you're raising if there's more than 2 or 3 or 4 elements. As a general rule, every element you define and analyze with the facts are going to require separate paragraphs so that the reader becomes very clear when you have changed tracks. Here, to prove murder 2, prosecutors got to show that Danielle committed a homicide. That's the actus reus. Every time you raise a legal term, it's got to be defined if it's got a definition. Homicide's the killing of one human being by another. Now comes the application or analysis part. That's the A. This is the part of the answer where you're going to attach specific facts to prove or disprove that element. This step is critical even though here it's obvious. In criminal law, we always start with the moving party. That means the party who bears the burden of proof. That means you're going to start with the prosecution's argument, the prosecution's voice, and then respond with the defense argument if there is one. The only time we change the order is where we're raising an affirmative defense on behalf of the defense. The claim of right, for example, in larceny, is an affirmative defense. The defendant would go first. So too is self-defense or insanity, as well as voluntary manslaughter generally. But our rule of thumb generally is your argument's going to start with the prosecution. Prosecution goes first, defendant responds. Inside our actus reus homicide analysis, there are 3 subparts that have to be discussed. First, was there a voluntary affirmative act or an omission that Danielle committed? Second, whether Danielle caused Victoria's death. And finally, whether Victoria died within the statutorily prescribed period of time. Here, Danielle did a voluntary affirmative act of killing Victoria. She stabbed her in the chest, and she caused her to die. There's nothing in this fact pattern to suggest that Danielle did this involuntarily, by reflex or convulsion, for example, or while unconscious. Second, because there's no intervening acts, we can say Danielle is the direct cause of Victoria's homicide. And finally, the facts say that Victoria died a few moments later. Therefore, her death is during that statutorily prescribed period of time. Therefore, we can conclude that Danielle committed a homicide of Victoria. That element of homicide is not really contested here at all. We just had to go through our analytical paces. The next element is the mens rea of murder 2, which is malice, a man-endangering state of mind. It can be met in one of 4 ways, and I'm going to say that in this exam answer. It can be met by the intent to kill, or the intent to commit serious bodily harm, or a death that results from depraved heart, or the intent to commit an inherently dangerous felony that's not listed in the Murder 1 statute. Here it appears that we may actually have two theories at play for malice. The first we've seen before. That's the theory of the intent to kill. That Danielle wanted Victoria to die when she stabbed her in the chest. Okay, we can see the deadly weapon doctrine at play. We can infer her intent to kill. But there may also be the second theory, and that is even if Danielle didn't want Victoria to die, she definitely demonstrated an intent to commit serious bodily harm. Each is going to require its own analysis, its own paragraph, if you will. So how do we show this intent to kill? I think the analysis is going to look like this. Stabbing someone with a sharp instrument in the chest infers the desire to cause death. Could one argue that the letter opener is a deadly weapon for the deadly weapon doctrine to apply? Yeah, I think so. A deadly weapon is often thought of as a gun or a knife, that's true, but there are other items that could be considered deadly weapons in the way they're handled. Indeed, we know that inmates fashion shanks from all sorts of materials, including soap. A pen to the neck hitting the jugular could end up being a deadly weapon.